right, let's go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out to our first annual Capital Markets Summit. We're very excited to be here and for 11 Residences Beyond to be hosting us tonight. Their sales associate, Pablo Rodriguez, is here. Pablo, can you give us a wave? All right, well, if anyone has any questions about the building, units that are still available, please reach out to Pablo. And I want to take a second to thank all of our wonderful sponsors tonight. Thank you, TitleEQ. Their principal, Matt, flew down from Philadelphia today to be here with us. He'll be moderating the panel. Thank you, 11 Residences, again, for hosting us. Thank you, Zero Plant-Based Caviar. It's a wonderful plant-based alternative to caviar. Thank you, E11EVEN Vodka. Thank you, Brugal Rum. And thank you, Kopu Water. For those of you who don't know, Profile is a real estate and lifestyle news publication. We have online, we have social, we have our email newsletter. So if you enjoyed tonight's event, please sign up. And we would love to hear from you again. We'll be hosting more events coming up next quarter, so look out for those. And on that note, I would like to introduce all of our panelists. We have Raul Llanes of City National Bank, Michael May of Silverstein Capital Partners, Dan Kodsi of Royal Palm Companies, Matt I'm going to butcher that. And Justin Oates of Cain International, as well as Juan Pedro of Merrimac Ventures. On that note, I would like to kick off the first question of the panel. I'm going to give you guys a hardball, and that is, please tell us about the most difficult deal that you ever financed or loan that you originated. Who wants to start?
Gentlemen?
All right, I guess I'm going to start then.
Go ahead.
Well, are you the moderator, right?
I'm the moderator.
Oh, okay, so you can't answer this.
We're going to kick it off.
I'm trying to figure out who the moderator is. Well, you asked the question. I didn't know who the moderator was. But actually, I did know you were the moderator. I saw it in the picture. Most difficult deal. So I have my lender sitting to the right, so I'm going to pick another deal. No, so I develop a lot of different types of projects. And I'm going to probably throw this, the most difficult deals are the most complicated projects, which are the high-rise projects, are usually the most difficult. And that's just because there's a lot of layers to these projects. So if you take Paramount, for instance, that was a pretty complicated project because originally, not to go back in time, but that project was actually supposed to be over a 3-story mall. It's a long story, but the mall never came to fruition. And so it was very complicated because we had to literally finance a project that sat on top of somebody else's property. So imagine lenders trying to get kind of their arms around the fact that you don't have land, right? You're actually building on air rights, but that project changed actually. During construction, we had to go back, we went back down to the property, we had to redesign it and everything else, long story. But it was complicated to the extent that we had multiple lenders. In large projects like that, sometimes you bring in pref equity that also acts as a completion guarantor. So imagine you have a senior lender, a mezzanine lender, a pref equity group, then you have your equity capital, and you have to answer to all these very nice people. A lot of complicated questions, about the project. And again, even legacy, I'll just bring it up. That's also a fairly complex project in that, again, you have layers of capital, senior debt, mezzanine debt, some pref equity. We also do EB5, which is a immigration program. And so that also fills part of the capital stack. However, that typically comes in over time, so it comes in later after you've completed the capital stack. So those are the most complicated. Of course, the easier projects are when you do traditional apartment deals or even just a standard condo project where you just have an equity component and a debt component. And again, those are traditionally easier. But even on those, you end up with, preferred equity or mezz, where it does make it a little bit more complex, especially when you have groups that are sometimes in a pref equity and you need additional capital in the project, then you start to determine, okay, who's really in the preferred position, and that could become hairy when some people think they're supposed to be in the preferred position. So it's, those are definitely the most complex deals.
Now I'll begin to moderate. I'll let somebody take it away, their most complex deal, but I'll also feed you that some of the things you began to talk about were physical, right? You're talking about air rights and, building on top of others. It touches on things like entitlements and approvals, even title and settlement services and complicated things like that, which gets me excited because I'm a nerd about stuff like that from the business that I'm from. But and then you kind of went into lending and financing side being the toughest thing. So I think usually that's the answer, right? That lending, financing are the toughest components to those tough deals. Anyone else have a good story about that, or even an entitlement or approval story? Because those are usually more fun to listen to.
I'll go a little bit of a different way, which is I always tell my team the best deals you do are the ones you don't do. And be it a terrible project, which is kind of easier, but fraud is the thing that becomes just the thing that gets super hard to figure out and contain. And we had a project where the sponsor had no equity, and so we created a company and then sold the land to himself to create fictional equity, and then tried to close it with us. Unfortunately, we didn't do it. We've had other projects where people were putting Rolls Royces on the property, or limited service hotels where they were running the Bunny Ranch out of them, and those are really tough. I think kind of going back to your point, what becomes harder in good projects is just big projects, big complicated. There's that better? Okay, big complicated projects. So the first one I did was Time Warner Center. It was like $2 billion with multiple condos and multiple lenders and creditors and all sorts of things. So projects like Dan's have a lot of components to them. You've got to understand and underwrite all of those. I think other ones are just weird uses. We have a $600 million loan right now on a stack stage studio project in Queens. It's the first time they've ever built a stage on top of a stage, 40-foot clear heights. So the question is, can you get the trucks in, and how does that work? And then the other is just kind of having the conviction to do loans when the market sucks. And so like during COVID, we bought a bunch of loans, and they weren't terrible loans and they weren't super distressed, but we just got them at good prices because people were liquid. So I think all of those things make the complications on top of all the legal and other things that you have to work through with an intercreditor and zoning and et cetera.
Several of you up here are lenders, several developers, some a little bit of both. I think one thing that's come up for me in conversation recently is that maybe 6 to 12 months ago, the climate, the types of conversations, I think the types of feelings people had, maybe even especially outside of Miami, but certainly in Miami too, were very different than they are today, right? At least that's what it seems to me. I'd love to hear from all of you, both on the development side and as lenders as well, what that looks like for you now, how you felt. Think about how you felt 6 months ago and 12 months ago. Don't tell me how you feel now. First, tell me what you see and what you like and what you're doing about it, and then afterwards end with how you actually feel. I see Raul looking over there.
Always start with the bank. We've seen the market probably since really mid-2022, right? Think about being in the banking environment where rates are actually increasing, cost of the projects have gone up, underwriting actual performance have changed in between. Being in Florida, I think it kind of secludes us for the rest of the U.S. in most cases. I think we have a purview of kind of where the market's heading. I think that there is a slower, where we're seeing, we're very active. We're being a lot more actually selective in our approach. Multifamily tends to sing the actual tune. I think people take office as the sector that is kind of rebranding itself. I think being in here in Florida, that's, if you see all the hedge funds, private equity from moving here, they can't find spaces, right? So I think there's a unique angle, especially here in South Florida, and what's happening. Looking at the tone over the next 6 to 12 months, you see some headline news, right? With like New York Community Bank and what's happening there, right? It creates that craze within the actual lending markets that are banks lending, banks are not lending. We are seeing an attrition of people are lending at maybe lower leverage bases. We're seeing a lot more banks coming back to the market, but I think they're being a lot more selective and locations they do, underwriting parameters changing from that end, recourse leverage we'll probably discuss much later. But I think there's more of a positive outlook or cautious actual optimism, at least in some of the key states such as Florida and Texas that we're seeing.
Feels like every crunch that comes from each cycle, and I've been around for 2 now, so not all of them, but a few, that regional banks, community banks get crunched a little bit more and a little bit more each time, and that feels like it's happening again. If anyone can speak to that, obviously there's been a lot of creativity. I know, Raul, you and I were talking earlier about some of that creativity in larger markets, but in general, and I think there has to be a lot more creativity as these community banks get more and more squeezed, and I've watched now for years, money shift away a little bit from coming from regional community banks more and more to private money and institutionals and mixtures thereof. Anybody have anything to? I'd love to hear what you guys think about that. I'll turn this way since I've talked over there so far.
I think the last year or so has been an interesting market. Going back, probably pre-pandemic, we had a period of 5 to 10 years that was, I'd say, relatively stable, predictable from a rate perspective. We've had a lot of major events politically, financially, globally in the last 4 years that have created all these different pockets of distress or opportunity and major macro shifts. At Cain, we've got about $16 billion in AUM across debt and equity. So we're both a developer, equity partner, and a lender. So we think we're unique from a lending perspective because we really understand the real estate. We have built condo projects, we've also lent on condo projects. And I think speaking specifically to events in the past year, one big transaction we worked on earlier in the year was during the regional banking crisis. We bought a portfolio of construction loans from PacWest, who was selling their loan book. And that was I'd say real estate is a very patient business in general, but you need to be ready when there's these windows of opportunity and be able to move quickly because there's a lot of competition, whether it's for debt, equity, across the capital stack.
I would say that bankers are pessimistic by nature. And so anytime something bad happens, the pendulum just super overshifts. But bankers are also really greedy, right? So at some point they all start competing and then it goes too far the other way. It reminds me of my teenage daughter where a friend calls and she's crying and then 10 minutes later she wants to go shopping, right? So it's not rational. And it's totally overreaching, and so it's hard as a developer when you've got a long-term perspective, like Cain and Dan, as you're putting together projects to deal with it. I think the biggest thing on a macro, and just having been in the market for a long, long time, is that from a regulatory standpoint, I grew up with Bear Stearns and Lehman, both of them running around, and they were doing 99% loans or 97% loans with 2% equity kickers, and they all went under, and then the government freaked out. And, you've ended up with these accounting things and technically like Basel II, Basel III, Reg D, and all these things. And basically the government's just pushed, and this is, like pushing my own book a little bit in Cain as well. The government's pushed risk away from banks, and every time anything bad happens, they just squish it down even more. And so that's been replaced largely by private capital. So I think if you look at just over the last 20 years, the biggest macro shift in the market is that. And the good news on that is, people who are in those markets that, aren't regulators and really understand the business and, hopefully understand the real estate.
It's true. When I was building in the 90s, we used to deal with banks mostly, not institutional lenders, and that has shifted. I mean, and even loan documents, I think they used to be about this thick back in the day, and today I don't even know how thick they are because you're signing signature pages, I think, that are about this thick now. So I don't even know the documents. I think if we printed them, they would be, I don't know if I could reach. And so it definitely got more complex, but to Michael's point, since '08, so what happened was, if you looked at where, we were talking pre-08, if you looked at end of '02 all the way through '07, the money was flowing, right? This is why all these, the Lehman Brothers and all of these groups went under, was the capital was flowing for too long. You had '03, '04, '05, '06, '07, and so and then you had an overbuilding because there was 90% loans. I mean, I remember doing deals with very little equity, and these are, $200-300 million projects back then. And so the capital flowed, it flowed for too long, and that's what happens with overbuilding. And so what's happened since '08, which is the good part, although the legal part is very annoying, but the good part was that lenders react quickly, so the capital markets react quickly in that if they see the market start to turn, they don't let the capital flow as long, and so you're not getting an overbuilding of product. Even in this last couple of years, we got a little bit of overbuilding, I think a little bit of too much multifamily in certain markets, where you're seeing rents get adjusted down a little bit, around the country now I'm talking about. And so, but again, the good news is because it got stopped so quickly, you're going to see a big drop in inventory, and then, rents will start to rise again. So the market has reacted much better, which is good because you're not getting overbuilding, but it's bad if you're in the middle of a project trying to get funding, so.
Do you think that's a function of regulation, or do you think it's a function of lenders getting smarter?
I don't think it's regulation at all. I think, lenders start to see rough seas, and they all kind of, to Michael's point, when they're all lending, everyone's competing, and the capital's flowing, and then when they start to see rough seas, it's all pencils down, and the minute one group starts putting pencils down, you see the entire lending community just all follow suit.
We've gotten smarter. It worked, maybe.
Yeah, '08 was a big lesson. I mean, if you lived through '08, you learned a lot. I don't want to get into it. I'll let other people talk. I could talk all day about '08, but it wasn't fun.
You were talking about the last sort of 12 months ago to now, and it's the banks have really gotten complicated on things that used to not be. Insurance, which has been a huge, as something that holding up. I mean, we've closed 2 rather large loans over the last 12 months with fully sold out condo projects, 100%. And the amount of time you would expect it to take with relationships, with everything, have tripled. And the insurance requirements, and as complicated as it's gotten, and the cost of that, and used to not be, again, less than 12 months ago. And that's made it just that much more complicated with less players who are willing to come in.
That's been such an interesting thing. Usually a discussion about insurance is boring, but I actually I'm doing another one of these tomorrow night in another city where I'm moderating another panel, and one of the people on that panel is an insurance guy, is an insurance expert, and we kind of briefed about that earlier, and that was such an interesting thing to me, that it's not only climate related, and down here I think it began there, right, where we've seen premiums not just go up, go up really meaningfully, 2, 3, 4x. And now what we're seeing, what I'm being told, and what I've learned in other cities, and here too, that it's related to litigation, right? We're talking about lawsuits now, and that's where we've seen that increase in cost, and what these insurers are doing about it, right? Peeling off what used to be relative, and obviously builder's risk when you're doing out sales of condos, that's a completely different animal, and we're seeing. We're seeing in these insurance companies, he's seeing these insurance companies peel down insurance and break it down, and kind of sell coverage a la carte, where it used to be a lot more comprehensive and a lot simpler. I know that's a little bit of, slightly off topic as far as insurance, but are you guys seeing those numbers? Is anyone seeing those numbers affecting deals and being a challenge to deal?
In a huge way. We closed 2 construction loans recently, but that was I wouldn't say sort of a stumbling block, but not a major negotiation to get across the line. I think that's the case in we have a couple developments, and placing the permanent insurance has been a huge complication. The market's gotten very challenging in the last 24 or 36 months. I think it's starting to stabilize. But
Yeah.
I mean, pick your spots of problems, right? Insurance costs are going through the roof. Construction costs were going through the roof. Certainly materials. Maybe labor costs have come down as supplies, as the new developments diminish. And then you've got cap rates going through the roof, which is really just the other direction, right? So values are going this way, costs are going this way, and it's kind of a perfect storm. And the hardest part to figure out is what's value, because there's this period of time where everyone's shell-shocked and no one's trading. So is an office cap rate 4? Is an office cap rate 6? It makes a big difference. And if you don't know, and at the same time your expenses are flying through the roof and your costs of construction are flying through the roof, it's such a dynamic situation. It's hard to pick a spot and a line in the sand.
And each one of these cycles is different. We talked a little bit about the last cycle and how much I think people have learned from it. We do business across the country, and with a concentration in a few markets. Miami is unique in a lot of ways. You could say the same thing about New York and maybe a few others, but very few others. And so, we talked about that cycle. Where do you think Miami is in its cycle? And I'll take it out of the rest of the country and look at Miami by itself, because it even feels now, especially now that it's behaving a little bit differently in a positive way, that just more keeps coming and more keeps coming. And now we'll talk about that in a moment too. But where do you think Miami is in this cycle? What's behind us? What's in front of us?
Oh, this is moving. Well, look, Miami, there's so many different products, right? Are you talking commercial, multifamily, residential? They all behave differently. If you look at the commercial market, I think Manhattan has over 500 million square feet of office, right? Miami, just the downtown Brickell area, I think has about 14 million square feet. So we have a really small office market. Imagine, we've never really had any real tenants in Miami. It's a very recent occurrence that you get the Ken Griffin and you get the Jeff Bezos that want to rent 50,000 square feet. We've never had that. The largest tenants in Miami were law firms, and it's the same law firm moving from building to building. So it's a very small office market, so we just don't build a lot of it. So we don't run into the same issues as, for instance, in New York. Imagine all these, B and C buildings. And again, I can't talk about New York office market, but imagine 500 million square feet. You could just throw that number out there. I think all of Dade County is about 40 million square feet if you count all the suburbs and everything else. So it doesn't even come to 10% of Manhattan. And so that's where the office is. So you don't have a problem there. On the multifamily side, might be a slight overtick in amount of units being delivered, but again, we have enough demand. And because of these office tenants, we're bringing in jobs finally in Miami that you have tenants can actually afford the rent, right? They have jobs that they can actually, I don't know how half the people in Miami afford rents. No clue. It must be family money or something. I don't know, because I see some people, I don't know. But anyway, that's a whole nother story. Condo market, problem is today you have to sell condos because of the cost. We're talking about costs, insurance, construction costs, everything else. You have to sell condos today at a price that's above where resales are, much further. 30, 40, 50% above where resale markets are. So somebody can just go buy an existing condo, even though I know we do these beautiful renderings and we think our condo projects are awesome when they're in a brochure form. But at the end of the day, it is drywall and cabinets and same bullshit, right? So the condo market we've not built a lot of condos. This last cycle, everybody, I remember in 21, everyone's like, are you launching another condo project? I said, no, this market it's an overinflated market. I think they launched 6,500 units and barely 1,000 got out of the ground. So So again, no pre-sales, and even with pre-sales, right? You're saying it's hard to get financed. So again, I don't think Miami's in any cycle. The good news is Miami was this boom and bust market forever. And I think because of the way the capital markets behave now, it's not allowed Miami to overbuild.
And it's interesting because over the last couple of years, obviously Miami's changing a ton, and we're seeing commerce come here in a way that it really hadn't before. And what I've observed is most cities in the U.S. were built around that commerce, right? Shipping in and out, rivers, whatever. And Miami was, I think, traditionally really built more around leisure. There was a little less infrastructure in terms of transportation, trains, and things like that is what I'm talking about. As I'm thinking about traffic, as I'm sure that's a big part's affected lifestyle, I think, a ton over the last couple of years. And now, that's changing, and it's not so easy to just drop infrastructure, into a city that wasn't necessarily designed for that. Although I watched a podcast with Deb, who was supposed to be here, Matwani, who's not here tonight, but talk about the interesting, or maybe it was you, perhaps, I don't remember, talk about the fact that there was space in some certain projects, in Brickell and in other places where you were able to build, plazas and make walkability in a way that isn't
I definitely
available
talked about that,
to
yeah.
develop other cities. So the infrastructure thing is really interesting, and how, it's easy to say, what will they do? I mean, there's no easy solution, but what's on the table for Miami's infrastructure? I think about transportation first, but there's other things involved there too.
There's a lot smarter people than me who've looked at this and haven't found the most anything to do. Like infrastructure-wise, like you said, Miami was not prepared for the boom it's had. It's a flat city without any real train, without any real metro moving. So things like Miami Worldcenter, focused neighborhoods that have gone vertical, where people are living, working, playing, tend to be the only real solution with anything short term. Because if you start, the Bright Line has been great to connect people, but again, it's a commuter train. It's expensive. It's not specifically a commuter train like you would expect in other cities. It's expensive for people to live in Palm Beach or somewhere and come all the way down to Broward or vice versa. So you don't have, and the space wasn't left. You've got most of your population in Dade County out west and down south. So how do you bring them in this direction to get them? You don't. You basically have to start creating mini downtowns in every one of these, every one of these sectors, and create that live, play, work environment so that it makes sense. If you wanna become Manhattan, it's going to be impossible. You can't have everybody from Homestead coming to downtown Miami to work. It takes 2.5 hours.
Yeah. People have to make more and move them around less, is the bottom line. Yeah. Staying on financing, or going back to financing, I should say, but staying on Miami a little bit. I was having a conversation with someone the other day, and we were talking about all cash transactions and how much that's changed in the market over the last couple of years. And in Miami in particular, you see a lot of non-US cash, and that's even changed in terms of where that comes from, over the last couple of years as well. I say couple of years, in this cycle that we've seen ourselves enter, and how sometimes that can affect value, right, and markets, and supply demand. Do you see that continuing? I'm looking at Raul, though I don't know that you'd see and touch that so much, but go ahead. I'll let you start.
Yeah, I think the capital inflow has continued to be strong, right? We've seen it, being in Miami, it's been more of a South American cash inflow. We're seeing a lot more from European, also in Asia as well, from an actual component standpoint. I mean, it's definitely increased financing. A lot of the sponsors we have seen are really from actually South America as well. A lot of the equity partners are coming from those actual markets. The projects we continue to see going into these projects are mostly the high-rise, multifamily, mid-rise projects. Talking about not just the actual, not the actually urban core, but also kind of the actual suburban markets, right? Doral, Coral Gables, we're seeing kind of those infill cities become kind of micro cities themselves to have that sprawl of folks. So, you know, very, very, I would say the last 3 years we've seen kind of that inflow coming here pretty heavily. I kind of joke around where if New York and LA had a baby, Miami popped out in the last 3 years.
Like Miami's the new New York and Tampa's the new Miami, maybe, I don't know.
Well, I heard the other day Miami is New York, Broward County is New Jersey, and West Palm is actually Hamptons.
I'll buy that. I got the space. And talking about that, and talking about partners, you know, obviously capital has to come from somewhere, whether it's cash or otherwise. And I've talked to and listened to some of you up here as well talk about the types of partnerships, the types of investors that you have grown and preferred to take on, you know, throughout your careers and over time. There's, you know, institutional money, of course. There's family office style money, for example, right? To look at two very different ways of looking at projects often and how that can affect even the plan, you know, of what you want to do with that project. And, you know, those are two very different motivations frequently. And I don't think either one is right or wrong. I think it depends on who you are. And so I'd love to hear all of you, frankly, your experiences with that, especially developers up here, in terms of what you prefer. Maybe that's changed over time, and what you think about that.
Yeah, I think overall the markets are pretty efficient. Like if you have a good site, good sponsorship, good project, you'll get financed. If you try to over-lever a project and you hit a period like we have in the past 3 years, you're gonna have to go find more expensive capitals. And sometimes the market takes a period of time to reset and reach that point of efficiency, but in general, there's a pocket of capital or source of capital for most types of deals. Local, regional banks, national banks, debt funds, credit funds, family office equity, sovereign wealth funds. So we've talked to all those different sources of capital for our projects, and different points in time in the market is when some of those can thrive and when others pull back. It's very generic, but my view is that the markets are efficient, and if you have a good project, good sponsorship, you'll get it done. And if you have a project and you announce it, call it a condo project in Miami, you don't hit your pre-sales threshold, you have to bag it, sell the site, or convert and do resi.
I would agree. I think institutional capital is, I think, very happy with the Southeast and very happy with Miami. I can tell you I love Miami condo project because you get 40% deposits or 30% deposits. California, you get 3% deposits. In Seattle, you get 6% deposits and all sorts of rescission rights. And they're super, super buyer, consumer friendly. And so when people buy down here, they close. Now, the hurdle is getting to the point of pre-sales that the project works, and so that kind of speaks for itself when it comes to financing the projects. And just going back to the point you had in infrastructure, traffic sucks everywhere. Okay, like I mean, LA traffic's terrible, Chicago's traffic terrible, in New York it's cheaper to take a helicopter to JFK than to take an Uber. So I think the idea that urban planners have figured out a great way for people to move around quickly. I mean, if you come to New York and you're in the Upper East Side and you want to visit somebody in Tribeca, there's zero chance they'll come see you because it just takes an hour to get there. So I think Miami's always had terrible traffic. It's no different, no worse. I think they're doing as good a job as anyone. I don't think it moves the needle. But I think all over the best thing that's happening in Miami is that the people, certainly in New York and maybe Chicago and somewhat LA, are all moving here because they want to pay taxes. $15 billion of tax revenue moved from New York to Miami last year. So as you think about the private equity guys, the banking people, you know, the institutional people, they want to be here, retire here, and they want to have offices here. So it's got such a tailwind to it that, you know, absent just massive overbuilding, I don't think that's stopping anytime soon.
On transit, what's interesting is if you look around the US, the only cities that have really good public transit, the infrastructure was built 100 years ago. So it's not like anyone's addressed this almost anywhere in the US in decades. New York, Boston, DC, all these older US metros they built subways 100 years ago. That hasn't happened. If you look at Dallas, Houston, if you look at the Sun Belt, where there's been the most growth over the past 30, 40 years, it's very limited, efficient public transit. So I think in an optimistic scenario, there's some kind of technology that would unlock that, but I'm more on the pessimistic side because it takes such collaboration at a state, local, and federal level to get the funding to do something and put in the infrastructure.
There's that guy who moved to Texas who's drilling holes underneath the ground. Maybe that works. But Miami's got that thing where, I mean, it is like New York in that you're kind of sort of on an island, right? You've got a swamp on one side and an ocean on the other. So, you know, when you go to Phoenix, for example, I think they built that city. I'm using that as an example, and I don't know Phoenix super well, but it's a newer city, you know, and it was built with cars in mind for sure, I think, when you look at the highways and the infrastructure there. And it feels like it's just, there's more space to go outward. But I agree, I mean, even in New York, I mean, you've seen people do kind of create their own. So if you live on the Upper East Side, you generally stay on the Upper East Side. You don't go downtown much, certainly not daily, you know, maybe for, you know, a show or something, but you're staying where you are. Something really interesting about that has happened in Miami that hasn't really taken off well other places is branding, right? Branding around real estate, condo branding. And it's really picking up steam here. I mean, it's been a really big thing for a while, and it seems like it's everywhere, and it's what everyone's talking about. But I don't see it succeeding much elsewhere. A little bit in New York, maybe, but really kind of nowhere else. And it's been kind of, I'll say it's been a Miami-born thing, I suppose. But how much success do you? First of all, what projects are any of you involved that are branded projects? Love to hear you talk about that. Love to hear you talk about how much you think that's lent to the project, to its value, and to its, to its speed and success. And do you think that's something that will ultimately catch in other parts of the country?
Well, I mean, I think Miami has pushed the off-brand, and by off-brand I mean not the traditional, because you've sold Waldorfs and Ritzes and branded residential with known hospitality brands around the world very successfully for many years. I think Miami's done an incredible job of pushing brands that weren't necessarily associated with real estate or with hospitality. They were just associated with high-end lifestyle, and that's sort of been the push. And Miami lends itself to that. That is sort of that Miami lifestyle. But we're involved with two more traditional ones. We're involved with the Waldorf in Pompano Beach, the Waldorf Astoria Residences there, and the Four Seasons in Telluride. And those, they lend legitimacy. They lend they give you a picture of what people can expect. And the more established ones, obviously, I think, have a cost, but they definitely deliver. They definitely deliver to the bottom line at the end. I think depending on the product you're trying to sell, you're trying to differentiate yourself in a market like downtown Miami, for example, where you're selling what we've called a lot of time widgets, just the same product that we need to differentiate a little bit. Dan said it before. It's drywall and cabinets at the end of the day. It's how do you package them? How some are prettier, some aren't, but at the end of the day, you're buying a 600-foot condo that you have a short-term rental availability in it. What can you do with it? So I think it lends itself to sort of catch the eye of more people, as opposed to just having a name that might not catch on.
I'm not buying a 600-foot condo.
Yeah,
It's
so
still too small.
I like brands that revolve around strip clubs, actually. No.
Do you have any of those?
Hey, that's I'm giving a little bit of love here to the 11 brand. So interestingly enough, right, so when you talk about brands, the hotel brands have been doing it for a long time, right? So it's nothing new. Four Seasons, Ritz-Carlton, these groups, you go around the world. It's not specific to Miami. There's a four-season, they launched one in Las Vegas, New Orleans, I think Seattle, I don't know, they're all over the place. So these brands have developers have realized you give these brands their 4 or 5%, it's worth it. You get a 20% premium or maybe even a 30% premium. That's about the premium that you'll get in a market, between 20 to 30% with a major hotel brand. Again, it's got to be a good location. Now, the brands they're not going to brand your product if you're not in a good location. So that is going to be important when you look at it. But what's unique about Miami is that we could do other brands here, where they took car brands, for instance. So that's where I think that's what separates Miami, is that your Aston Martins and Porsches and Bentleys and they're taking car brands, or I'm going to bring up 11 again, nightclub brands, I'll call it. That's where Miami really differentiates itself, in that we could take brands that are not traditionally related to real estate and throw it on real estate here and actually get a pop for it.
Yeah, my experience is it totally works, and I completely don't understand a lot of it. 11 I get, it's like a lifestyle brand, but when you think like I want my condo to smell like sushi, or like a tortellini, or the backseat of a car, or maybe a bracelet, maybe, I don't know. I always look at it and it kind of cracks me up, but it works. And we see so many deals, and I know you've got a project that's got a car brand on it, maybe others. And so, my experience is it absolutely works. And the way I think, I guess my feeling is it must just be that it gives a cachet, especially as you have a kind of an overseas or out of town buyer that just recognizes the brand, associates it with some sort of quality, and then that then inures to the belief in the project.
I think it really works in Miami in certain instances. We built the Missoni Bahia project with our partners Oko Group in Edgewater. I think it moved the needle there a little bit, but it was also a really good site on the water. So I think you get a premium when you have a good brand and you execute it correctly. We have a project in South Brickell, E11EVEN Residences, that's a phenomenal waterfront site overlooking Key Biscayne near the Rickenbacker Causeway. I don't think that really needed a brand because there hasn't been a new condo built in that micro location in decades. But then if you look in Brickell, not our project, but I'll just mention like the Cipriani project that just closed their construction loan. I think doing a Cipriani brand on a site that is like fine, but there's nothing particularly unique about that site, but it's another nice project in Brickell, but putting a Cipriani brand on it, I think, makes it a more compelling opportunity or compelling offering to the buyers.
That's super interesting, moving the middle class up a little bit, right? If it's good, but needs a little bit of help. Do you know of any that have failed? Do you know of any brands that have attempted to, non-real estate related brands, not the hospitality and hotel brands, but others that are a little weird, or that you might not associate with real estate that have not worked? Never heard one. I
assume Nathan's wouldn't work down here.
I'm calling the Dollar General people. After this, there's a lot of untapped.
I'm sure there's instances it hasn't worked for the developer because you have to get a certain premium above what an unbranded product would get because you're paying a licensing fee and some percentage or break to the brand. So I wouldn't know deal by deal, but you need to make sure you're hitting enough of a premium of a non-branded.
And it also depends on not only the premium you're hitting in that, but what are the brand's specifications to you? How much are they bringing to your how much value are they bringing versus how much are they costing you? And some of obviously the more developed brands are there. Some of the less developed brands can actually be problematic because they don't have a standard. They just are envisioning a standard. If they don't understand real estate, if they don't understand that you're selling a condo, you need to make it work, they can get in the way without getting into specifics about what brand. If you just grab a high-end clothing brand and say, hey, you want to do a tower, they might think great, but then they're going to send their fashion designer to design their entire interiors. And you're going to run into a wall.
Yeah, yeah. Let's shift the gears a little bit and talk about deals that have gone bad. I think you started to talk about that early on. But, I'd love to hear from all of you. Every single one of you is gonna have to say, you're gonna have to step up on this one. A deal that you thought, you know, I don't know how I'm getting out of this thing. And obviously what you did, you're sitting here today, so you got out of it. JP, go ahead. A deal that's gone bad for you. Good story about a deal that's gone bad. You didn't think you're getting out of it. You weren't sure how you were going to find your way out of it. You got a lot of them.
Oh, no way. Tell them that.
Look at hard.
Yeah, I mean, it was, I had 7 or 8 projects on my, no, but we did workouts. I think if you work with your lenders, and finish the projects, you got through them. You know, to Michael's point earlier, when he was saying deposits, that was a big deal, right? So in Hawaii, prior to Hawaii, we used to take 20% deposits. And I won't forget, there was a bank called Chorus Bank. They were out of Chicago. They did about 114 loans around the country. I was one of them. And I remember the principal saying, oh, well, 20% deposits in LA, they only get 3%. That's a great deposit. But what happened was when values dropped by 30 to 40% and people felt they were out of the money, everybody walked away from their contracts. At this point, they didn't care. They're like, I'll walk away from my deposit. What's the point on closing? I already lost my equity, so why would I close? And so that was really what really hurt the Miami market is people just literally walked away. Not only they walked away, they sued for their deposit back, which was crazy. You'd actually get sued for them walking away from the project. So that was what the learning lesson was in Miami by getting the higher deposits, where now you're 40%, 50%. And so you're not getting the same overbuilding as I mentioned earlier. So that's really what I think makes Miami an incredible condo market is that we have big deposits and it's not worth for anyone to walk away from.
Go. We'll get that.
Yeah, the markets since then, like you said, deposit thresholds are up. So the project, back to a comment I made earlier, the project's not going to get financed unless it has the right level of deposits and sales in place. And once it's built, hopefully you get from 50, 60% sold to sold out. So I think the market's corrected. It took some time, but that 20% deposit structure doesn't exist.
And it's actually interesting because one of the complications that it's had that we didn't have two years ago is that selling early was actually over the last 18 months been a problem because you factored in what your costs were going to be. You sold 60, 70% of the project. Then you got to rush, you got to get a GMP, build the thing and get it done. And all of a sudden construction costs are going through. Well, which is something we had not lived through because it wasn't, we had been pretty consistent. We all looked at it and said, you know what, it's 3%. So let's tack on 15% to make sure we're okay. And then it was 40% or it was 50%. And all of a sudden you're like, wait, how do I make that back when I've got 20% of my inventory, if that? So that is complicated a little bit in that sense, but obviously the deposit structure here is just makes everything on the financing side of everything that much easier.
I've got one. So a kid comes in for an informational interview, which means his parents got him into it for a job. And so he says to me, like, third question is, what's your personal business mission statement? It just annoys the shit out of me. So, but it didn't eat at me. So at the end, I said to him, I said, do business in places you like to go with people you like to hang out with. And the method to that madness is people you like to hang out with, like Dan, are generally smart. And if there's a problem, you can work through it. And places you like to go tend to be rising economies, right? You're not going to, this in Iowa, but you have to pick some place you want to go. Whereas if you make a bad investment decision, then you're not going to get out of it. And so I did a deal in Atlantic City on a casino. And after I did it, the group I did it with were, really sharp private equity, but bad guys. And I realized I've been to Vegas 46 times in 18 months. So I was running an office at every 8 days for a year and a half. And I hadn't been to Atlantic City once, and I lived in New York. And so I did it with bad people in a place that I absolutely despised going. And it was, one of the few deals that really just didn't work out in my career. But, I think as you think about how you do business, I think my advice and that it wasn't a colossal failure, thankfully, but it wasn't great. Just focus on finding people that you trust and that are smart and hardworking and honest, and pick markets that you can underwrite really strong.
Yeah, to add that, so interesting, right? 2008, right? Very difficult period. A lot of bad loans, a lot of developers basically, gave back the keys. You have 2020, COVID, right? Figuring out what the world was going to look like there, especially within the actual hospitality market, right? These properties were going at zero. Dealing with the actual interest rate component now. Interesting enough, right? The market today, I could tell you personally, we've had clients that have given back properties, especially on the actual private equity side, and decide to get another fund and buy it back at an actual discount. So it's really, again, it's really a relationship on the banking side and working out through the actual process. Again, there are times that, the actual economics doesn't work, but as you're giving it back, right, it's just working out with your actual loan.
I have one more question, but I'm gonna save it. How about that? Right? We're wrapping up. We're gonna save it for next time, so y'all can think about what you think it might be. I'll leave you with that mystery. And on that note, handing things over. Thank you, everyone.
Let's give a round of applause to our panelists, please. Thank you so much all for joining. Again, Dimitri and I are the co-founders and co-CEOs of Profile Miami. We're a real estate media and lifestyle company. We host regular events. So please sign up for the newsletter on ProfileMiamiRE.com. Stay in touch, follow us on Profile Miami on Instagram, and please share any content from tonight's event. Thank you.
We'd all be remiss thank you, Katja, for putting together a panel where you can drink tequila. Add your chip.
E11EVEN Vodka. Thank you, Michael Simpkins.